Yeah, are you going to do a deep dive?
I'm going to deep dive. Are you ready?
Let's go.
I want to share a pretty interesting story I heard recently with an update to that story that I heard last week that sort of blew me away. Setting the stage a little bit for this, everything in Saudi Arabia, we've discussed it, is either part of, directly related to, or a result of, or at minimum touched by, or mildly affected by Vision 2030. And the reason why we landed on the name for this podcast, the 2030, is because it really is a term that touches all things happening in Saudi Arabia: social, economic, policy, culture, everything. Vision 2030 is both a goal and a plan. The goals are set, the destination is identified, and then the roadmap is put in place. So I add that context because what is happening is top down, but also only really happens with buy-in, with everyone working on the same page. And we discussed that a few weeks ago with our report card segment on Vision 2030. And if you haven't heard that, check it out. It's in episode, I believe, 4, and you'll see the segment as well on our YouTube page. What's happening and the progress in Saudi Arabia with Vision 2030 is both obvious and incredible. The thing about Vision 2030 is it's a Saudi initiative. It's made in Saudi. And that phrase, made in Saudi, is actually enormously important for Vision 2030's success. For Vision 2030 to be successful, Saudi Arabia needs to be a maker of things. It needs to manufacture, produce, be a logistics hub. It needs these things to create jobs and skilled workers and many things. Most important among them, an economy that isn't going up and down in lockstep with oil prices. Can Saudi Arabia do all of this on its own? I think maybe, but with foreign investment, it goes so much faster. The government knows this, and this is really a cornerstone of the vision. So recently I came across a really interesting story of a company I want to tell you about, and you'll see how it fits into this context. The company is called Johnson Controls, one of the largest companies in the world, Fortune 500 company, an American-founded company that makes air conditioners, HVAC stuff, but now it's so large and diversified, it does smart building, security, fire stuff, etc. The company is super old. It goes back to 1883 in the U.S. and Wisconsin. 1883, and I love this. I love these like American business stories, like the kind of stuff you'd see on History Channel. So bear with me. Warren S. Johnson received a patent for the first electric room thermostat. His invention helped launch the building control industry and was the impetus for a new company. Johnson and a group of Milwaukee investors incorporated the Johnson Electric Service Company in 1885. Fast forward almost 140 years later, it's a huge company, 100,000 employees. In 2005, Johnson Controls acquired York International, started in York, Pennsylvania, which is where my dad is from, actually, in 1874, which developed the York brand of refrigeration and HVAC equipment. And at the time of the acquisition, it was the world's largest independent manufacturer of air conditioning, heating, refrigeration, machinery. Okay, so where am I going with this? I mentioned earlier, Vision 2030, basically a large experiment, a well thought out plan. Part of that is to get Saudi Arabia to be a builder and maker of things, made in Saudi. But before the vision, before the local content mandates, before the made in Saudi was ever a thing, Johnson Controls International saw what others didn't. In 2015, before the vision, Johnson Controls saw the region as a great market and also saw an advantage of manufacturing locally in Saudi Arabia to supply the Saudi market, but also the regional market. And this was a business decision for them. They saw the opportunity to have a plant in Saudi Arabia as an American company established as a joint venture to meet demand in the very hot region of the Middle East. I mean, selling air conditioners in Saudi Arabia seems like a good business. They agreed, but they also thought, let's manufacture them here. They did that. Fast forward about 5 years later, while talking about manufacturing and attracting international companies to manufacture in Saudi Arabia locally was becoming a hot topic, Johnson Controls opened up its factory doors, started hiring Saudis, and started actually doing it. And I've toured this factory in Cake, the King Abdullah Economic City. It is not an assembly plant. This is a factory. Raw materials in one side and products out the other. And they've become the go-to supplier for projects large and small, giga projects, smaller projects, because they can make not just line products, but also custom bespoke products for huge projects like the Grand Mosque in Mecca, the Cleveland Clinic in Abu Dhabi. They did the Burj in Dubai. You couldn't list all of them, but if you're a developer and you want made in Saudi, they're top of the line American technology essentially, but manufactured locally in Saudi Arabia. So the story gets even better, especially for Saudi authorities and officials who want to see the kingdom manufacture and not only supply the local market, but to export to regional and global markets. So last week, Had a little stint in the hospital, as we talked about on a previous episode. Not great, but all is okay. I spoke from the hospital with the CEO, Dr. Mohammed Al-Sheikh. He's a friend of mine, and he told me something that made my jaw drop. And the more I thought about it, and I had a lot of time to think about it sitting alone in this hospital room, the cooler it seems. The cooler, pun intended, I guess, not intended. Dr. Mohammed told me that not only are they starting to use the plant to export around the region, it has been doing this for a while, and now they're ramping up. They're going to start exporting globally. And this is the part that really blew me away. This week, they're having a ceremony at the plant in Cake, north of Jeddah, to celebrate a first. They are going to start exporting Saudi-manufactured chillers back to the U.S. market. The company is calling it, and I think quite fairly, a significant moment for its company's history and also the Saudi-made initiative. JCI, which is Johnson Controls International, is facing a global deficit of 1,000 units per year, and they selected the Saudi factory to bridge this gap. So just thinking about it, U.S. founded company, 140 years old, really a leading company in the space, invested in the concept of local content and local manufacturing in Saudi Arabia before it was even on vogue in the kingdom. And in their space, they were the first to market with this strategy. They're still the only ones doing it. So now that U.S. founded company, is manufacturing its products in Saudi Arabia and supplying the local market with locally made products, and now the U.S. market with Saudi-made air conditioners. So I did a deep dive on this because I was just sort of like fascinated by the story. But if others are doing what JCA did and does today, Vision 2030 and all of Saudi Arabia is definitely going to benefit from that style of investment into their economy. And if you're an American or you're visiting America starting this summer, you may be in a building that is air conditioned by a Saudi manufactured air conditioning unit, which is kind of mind blowing. But this is just an amazing story. That's my deep dive. Congrats to them and their accomplishment, their achievement here.
Very cool. Thank you for highlighting that and highlighting Made in Saudi, which is a great, one of the great initiatives of the vision, and that it was launched. I think it was launched by the Ministry of Industry and Mineral Resources in 2021. And it's a National Industrial Development Logistics Program initiative that's managed by the Saudi Export Development Authority. So I think what's really cool about Made in Saudi is, as you said, it's not just about making sure that things look like they're diversifying, but there are true initiatives behind it. And if you look at some of the kind of achievements of Made in Saudi, 1,740 plus companies have signed on, 7,600 Saudi-made products in 16 different sectors, and 180 countries are actually importing Saudi-made products to varying degrees of sophistication, obviously. So what you were talking about is really exciting because, again, this is showing how Saudi's really taking the expertise and developing it, building on it. This is what you want from FDI, right? You want that technological transfer. You want people to benefit from it. You want to create jobs, and you don't want to necessarily have to stay there forever, without anybody benefiting, right? It doesn't all have to get repatriated back to countries that initially came in with the investments. You want a lot of expertise to happen on the ground, and that transfer and collaboration leads to more innovation, I think. And so that's really exciting. Excellent.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it also kind of ties into Saudi Arabia's interest of being a physical location that is attractive, like its physical position between Europe, the West, and the East. I mean, if you're talking about manufacturing things like chillers that go on top of huge buildings like hospitals, they're massive. And when I visited the factory, they had a couple that they were building for local, apartment complexes or whatever they were, but they're huge. So if you think about it, it's like you're not just shipping boxes and you stack them up, or you can ship them anywhere from America and they go all around the country. You put them on airplanes. These don't really go on airplanes, I don't think. They need to be shipped. And so when your location is next to the Jeddah port, which I believe is one of the largest in the world, we talked about that in a previous episode as well. You're and KAEC is a port as well. You're strategically located in a port in Saudi Arabia that can access European markets faster and cheaper, full stop, or Asian markets faster or cheaper. They just started exporting some as well to China, which also blew my mind because a lot of other air conditioning manufacturers manufacture in China and export out. And so it's just a really cool story, and it kind of highlights a lot of things that Vision 2030 is trying to do. It's like a successful beta test, I guess you could say. But it is interesting too, because like if they're going to be shipping back to America, there's got to be a serious shortage in America and a serious inability to fill the orders, right? Because I mean, there are many factories for Johnson Controls in America, founded in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I believe it was, or at least got its first round of investment there. So I don't know, just the idea of these air conditioners going onto a ship, going out of Jeddah, coming in wherever they're going to come in, and hitting the U.S. market is cool, really, really cool.
But I think air conditioning is something that might be prevalent in certain parts of the US, but not in all parts of the US. So, I mean, I grew up spending my summers in Seattle and nobody had an AC because it didn't really get very hot most of the year. And even in the summer, you just open the windows and it would be fine. You might get a couple hot days, but a fan would do it. And it's not like that anymore. And so I think that there probably is a shortage in kind of manufacturers for multiple reasons, but part of it is because the demand wasn't there. And I think people are still reluctant. And here in the UK, people judge me for having AC. I get a really good night's sleep on the nights where it's impossible to sleep because it gets really hot and oppressive in the city when it's hot, right? Like if you're out in the countryside, it's no problem. But in the city, all of the roads, the concrete, the buildings, they absorb the heat and it doesn't go away. And it's really difficult to sleep at night when you have stretches of heat waves that go on for several days. It just doesn't cool down at night, which it does more in Seattle, or at least it has in the past. So I do think that this is an opportunity. Like, obviously, there are people that are against air conditioning for different reasons, but still, I think when you have one and you need it because it's really hot, you appreciate it.
Air conditioning is maybe my favorite thing to talk about outside of the weather. Obviously, they're kind of tied together. But I mean, I cannot sleep in a warm room at all. And my wife likes it to be warm, but I don't. So if it were up to me, I would be sleeping in like a refrigerated box with like 100 blankets, just like barely alive, and she'd like it to be warmer. But it is interesting because the social acceptance, like you would go to Maine or New England or Washington in the summer because it was cooler back in the day, back when Johnson Controls was founded. You didn't need air conditioning. And so it's interesting that it came from Wisconsin, which is cooler. Just as it is interesting that Carrier is based in Syracuse, where it's cooler as well. You'd think that maybe they would be coming out of like Birmingham, Alabama, or like Tampa, Florida, because it's so hot. Anyway, tangent. I love air conditioning so much. I run it all the time. And my house here has like two of those like central units, one for each floor. And that was like a big selling point for me. When I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, we're living in an ice box. I'm in for this. But yeah. Also, you kind of get the, like, when you're in a city like you are, it kind of blocks out some of the white noise. It
creates the white noise. Yeah. I have to do a little bit of a shout out though. So when I was doing my field work for my PhD, I visited Zamel AC in the Eastern Province, and they were incredible. They helped me do my pilot study with a group of women that were working in the factory there that had gotten the initial training on how to manufacture their air conditioners, and that was a big thing that they were promoting really as well. So Zamel's been manufacturing air conditioners in Saudi for the past 50 years. They're Saudi made, and they're very proud of that, and they're really, one of the leading kind of manufacturers of air conditioners. It's a different story, but they're also, made in Saudi certified, or they're part of the program, if you will. But when I went and visited the factory and spoke to the women that were working in it, again, it was kind of a new thing at the time to get women working in factories and in industry. So that was something that they were kind of leaders in at the time. And the women were really proud. They were really proud to be working. My field work was back in 2015, 2016. So right at the beginning of the vision. And so it was quite a different time. And you didn't have as many women working in general, let alone working in an industrial factory in the first industrial city in Dammam. It was very different. But they were very proud because they were getting incredible training. They were moving up in their positions within the factory. They were getting supervisory roles. And it was a great experience. And it really did set the tone for kind of so much of the rest of my field work. So just air conditioners in general, I think, are really interesting. And looking at the training component in that is also really interesting, and how that's evolving within Saudi. And then talking about tech transfer and innovation. And you're going to need to innovate in this space quite a bit, because as the rest of the world is going to need air conditioning as things get warmer and the climate changes, I think we're going to need to figure out how to do it more effectively, efficiently, and better. So I think it's exciting to know that, there are people that are really investing in the training component of it as well.
Yeah, Zamel's an amazing company, and part of the ecosystem, right? I mean, so you have sort of local Saudi companies that are manufacturing air conditioning. I mean, the market there is massive because it's so hot, right? I mean, everybody's got to have them. And so it's interesting. You fly into Riyadh Airport, and Zamel Air Conditioning does Riyadh Airport, and you see the Zamel units above each thing. It's sort of like a really good branding for Zamel, because you're kind of getting off the gangplank and it's usually warm, and you see the Zamel units on each gangplank and next to them, and it's just kind of you're like, oh, that's so nice. Yeah, great company. Anyway, shout out to air conditioning heading into summer. Middle East is getting hotter than any other region on the planet, so thank goodness to the pioneers that invented it and the good companies manufacturing it and distributing it. So ode to air conditioning is a deep dive this week.